Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to welcome you all here today to the first Fall Music Biz webinar for 2022. My name is Henrik Bick. I'm part of the communications team here at the Music Business Association. Grateful to see you all here today. Before we get things kicked off, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes to run by you. During today's presentation by MusicWatch, in order to connect with one another, be sure to change your chat settings on your Zoom chat box to everyone, so that way you'll be able to network with one another. And if you'd like to ask any questions or anything comes up during the session you want any more clarity for, be sure to drop them in the dedicated Q&A box on your Zoom dashboard. We'll be answering all questions at the end of the presentations. In case you missed it, today is the first of our Fall 2022 webinar series, but it's the first of many. We have another session coming up on Thursday, September 29th, hosted by Beat Bread. And down the road, we have future sessions hosted by SoundCloud Session and Exactuals. You can find out more about our entire fall webinar slate and register for all these sessions for free at musicbiz.org. Under the education tab, you'll see our webinar section. Of course, I'll also drop this link in the chat for you in case you want an easier access to that as well. Outside of the realm of webinars, but in the space of physical music, Let's Talk Physical is our physical music-minded event that we host biannually. Our next session of that will be hosted, as you may have seen in the beginning, on Wednesday. That's next Wednesday, September 21st. You'll hear from some data from Luminate on consumption metrics for the US market with regards to vinyl, as well as some very important updates from the indie retail community and vinyl pressing plants on how they're working to meet the demands caused by new influx of vinyl consumers. So after we've talked about all the data today, you'll have another chance to refresh on Luminate's perspective next week. But before we get there, we have to talk about today's session. So I'm really grateful to have Russ Crupnick, the managing partner of MusicWatch, here today to walk through consumption stats for the US as well. Russ, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thanks to everybody who's participating. What I'd like to do today is we did a very comprehensive research study, consumer research study on the vinyl market back in March. And I'd like to share with you some of the results of that today, and then hopefully we'll leave enough time for conversation and for questions. So let me just share my screen and we can launch into this. There we go. So, just to give you a little bit of background, earlier in the year, much earlier in the year, a colleague of mine, Mark Feiner, who many of you may know, called me and said, you're kind of the research consumer data guru. Why is it that vinyl is growing the way that it is over the past couple of years? And I had some demographics, but I didn't really understand the deep diagnostics of what was going on with the vinyl market. So in collaboration with Mark and several others, we embarked on doing a full consumer research study to understand, first and foremost, why was vinyl growing the way that it has over the past couple of years? And, kind of equally important, what does the future look like? And in between those kind of two pieces of bread, we caked in a ton of information about discovery and retail and features and genres. And, I can only show you in the next half hour or so, just a little surface of that information that we have, but it really gave us a great handle on what was going on with the vinyl consumer. So just, a little housekeeping. The study was jointly sponsored by the RIAA and Music Business Association, but I do want to say both of those organizations said to me, as they always do, you go out and do this independently. We want to hear what's really great about vinyl. If there are things that are not so great, we want to hear that as well. We really want an independent third party to help us understand the landscape of vinyl. So what we did is we surveyed about 1,400 respondents in the US, and we spoke to vinyl buyers, new buyers, veteran buyers. We spoke to people who just listen and don't buy. We spoke to non-buyers, and then just kind of supplement this, we also spoke to people who are on the Record Store Day subscription list, so that we could get really at the most hardcore vinyl buyers and understand how they might be different from, the average person who's walking the street. This was conducted in March of 2022. We presented some of the initial findings at the conference back in May. And also a couple of weeks ago, I was down in New Orleans to do summer camp. So, and you may have seen some of the findings reported by periodicals such as Billboard, did some coverage of the study. So as I said, I'm not going to be able to get into every nit and detail of all of the questions that we asked, but I just really want to try to answer some of the key fundamental questions, and then we'll hopefully have enough time that if you've got some lingering things, you reach out to me, and I can hopefully try to answer them. I just want to go back and put some context on this. I'm guessing most of you have probably seen this chart, and this is the RIAA. This is revenues for vinyl going back to 1973 and all the way to last year in 2021. And you can see in 1978, revenue peaked at, I think it was about $2.5 billion, which is about, in today's dollars, well, yeah, yesterday's dollars, it was about 10 billion before inflation really got rampant. So about $10 billion in 1978. 78 was really the year of John Travolta, the two top selling albums in 78, with the soundtrack for Saturday Night Fever from the Bee Gees, and the Grease soundtrack. So, John got the top two spots in the charts those years. And then, if you take a look from basically most of the 90s into the late aughts, vinyl disappeared. I mean, we rarely had a conversation at all. I know in all of the research reports that we did back in those days, I think for years we didn't even mention vinyl in terms of being a format. And then about 10, 12 years ago, things started to perk up. And then you can see by the time we got to 2021, sales had recovered to about 1 billion. And in fact, last year, based on RIAA units, the unit sales were up 67%. So I think Mr. Finer's question was a really good one, is, why is that tail going off the way that it is? So let's explore some of the reasons why. I think number one is we have seen, and this is in research that we do at MusicWatch, we do an annual music study each year. We've been doing it for about 20 years that looks at the diagnostics of purchasing and streaming and piracy and all of the elements around music. And one thing that we've seen is this continuous growth in the number of vinyl buyers. Last year, we estimated that there were about 17 million vinyl buyers, and that was double-digit growth over the prior year. So we have a lot more people coming into the stores, whether that's physical stores or going online, and purchasing vinyl. The other thing that's happening is they are really opening up their wallets. If you go back to 2018, the average buyer, the average purchaser of new vinyl spent about $38. By the time 2021 came around, that had doubled to about $79. And, imagine some people are just buying one album, maybe spending 25. Some people might be buying 10, 15, 20, 30 albums and spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But, two very important statistics is A, we've been growing the base of vinyl buyers, and secondarily, when they come into stores, they're spending more money. Both of those things are great facts to report. I think, before I dive into some of the details, one of the things that we discussed with the physical committee at Music Biz, and also something that Portia was really interested in, was kind of, can we talk about some of the myths around vinyl? So I just want to, hit on a couple of those themes before we go into some of the deeper data. Some of the things that you might hear surfacing is that, women aren't buying vinyl, that this is basically, a male-dominated market. that the reason, the only reason that people buy vinyl is just simply because it's nostalgic. When you take a look at all of the classic rock albums that are being purchased, it's just being purchased by people of my generation, older baby boomers. That young buyers, when they buy it, they're just buying it as merch. They put it up on their wall, or they collect it, but they don't actually listen to the records. Maybe they don't even own turntables. And that for young buyers, again, that all of their purchasing is about new releases from favorite artists that they're hearing on streaming services and maybe even on radio these days. The reality is, none of those things could be, all of those things are really further from the truth. If you take a look at vinyl buyers in 2021, half of them identify as female. So this is a market that's really come from something that maybe years ago was very male dominated, but it's very much in equilibrium in terms of gender, in terms of who's buying. And while the sound quality and the nostalgia are really important, and I'll dig into that in a few moments, about 75% say it's the artwork and all of the packaging that actually motivates them to buy vinyl. What's interesting about genres, and I'll share this data as well, is your perception about Gen Z buyers, about 13 to 24-year-olds, 13 to 35-year-olds, Gen Z and millennials, is probably incorrect. Actually, 1 in 4 of them say that classic rock is their favorite vinyl genre. So when you think about who's buying all the old Pink Floyd and Beatles remasters, it's not just dad and granddad, it's their kids as well. And only 23% of 13 to 24-year-olds are buying vinyl just to collect it or display it. They're really listening to it. While not all of them have a turntable, most of them do. The vast majority of them do. And they're really into some of the same sonic attributes of vinyl as mom and dad might have been back in the day. The other thing about young people that we learned is they're not just into the latest release that's coming from their favorite artist, their favorite current artist, although they really like that music. About 40% of them say that they're buying niche genres, and by niche genre, I mean, they're buying jazz, they're buying classical, they're buying older soundtracks. So a lot of them are buying across the whole spectrum of genres. And, just like mom and dad used to look for things that were out of print or older, a lot of younger people are doing that as well. So interesting thing that we learned about the vinyl market when it comes to younger people is a lot of younger buyers start to adopt the same kind of behaviors as people who've been, who never stopped buying vinyl, even through the 90s and early 2000s. So let's go back to the question of, why have the sales for vinyl been on the tear that they've been at? 32%, so 1 in 3 buyers are absolutely new. They're virgin buyers within the past couple of years. And what we've been able to do with the format is attract a very diverse audience. About 41% of the new buyers are 13 to 24-year-olds. I mean, roughly falling into what we call Gen Z. About half of them are women. Interestingly, new buyers are Hispanics are very overrepresented. The Hispanic population in the US is about 17%. About 27% of our more recent vinyl buyers identify with Hispanic or Spanish origin. And what's really interesting is that many of these new buyers quickly become addicted. They start to adopt the same, listening habits, the same shopping habits as people who have been doing this for years and years and years. So, it's not just this kind of, I go into a mass merchandiser and I see something from my favorite artist and I buy that and I put it up on my wall. It's, once I kind of join the club, it's not just merch. I'm listening, I'm starting to collect the value of this, I'm evangelizing on social, all of the things that you would identify with somebody who's maybe a more hardcore vinyl buyer. So credit, when we take a look at, the reasons why people are buying vinyl and the reasons why people are buying more vinyl, um, it's pretty complicated. And I'll show you a lot of the detail in a second. If you start out, yes, absolutely, the originality, the authenticity, the sound quality, and even the nostalgia is very important in terms of motivating people to buy vinyl. But there's the other side of this as well, and some of it depends upon your age or how long you've been buying vinyl. In terms of how important A is versus B. But being attracted by the artwork, the design that goes into the disc, the packaging, all of the features that we can build into the vinyl format are things that for some people are equally or even more important than the authenticity and the sound quality. So, on one hand, we've got to focus on the sonics of all of this. On the other hand, we've got to focus on what the package actually looks like. And then there's this other element that surfaced there that, especially for younger people, it's artists and labels who are feeding fan demand. You'll see, and I'll show you a little bit of the detailed data, that if fans really want to embrace and reward artists, they see vinyl as being one of the best formats to do that. Doesn't mean that, streaming isn't great, or for those who are still buying CDs or digital downloads isn't great, but there just seems to be a special relationship between fans and artists when it comes to vinyl. This is something I can really do in order to reward the artists for effort that they're making. And, streaming, it's not necessarily, vinyl good, streaming bad. I do a lot of vinyl. I don't do so much streaming. What we did find is that streaming is actually serving as a discovery mode, or as a feeder, or as a path to purchase for vinyl. What's happening is a lot of people hear their favorite artists, or they hear a song that they really like. They hear it on Spotify or Pandora or Apple Music. And then they're turning around and they're buying that on vinyl to have it as well. So they may add it to a playlist on a streaming service, but they also may run to go to Amazon or go to Target or Walmart and actually purchase the product as well. So let me share with you a little bit of the detail. We asked about 40 different reasons or purchase motivators as to why people buy vinyl. And I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but everything from I like the artwork to, the stores where I'm shopping have interesting releases, to it's an impulse shop, or we've delved into special editions and deluxe editions and so on. Let me just kind of be helpful and summarize this for you. If you take all of the things related to sound factors, the studio quality sound, the warmth and the richness of vinyl, the authenticity of the sound and the experience, about 80% selected one of those things related to sound factors. About 75% selected something related to the package. I like the artwork, I like the packaging or the disc design, I like all of the extras that are baked in. And as I mentioned, we got into into a lot of detail about what specifically those extras need to be. And then about 50% said that, I do this because I really want to support the artists. That if artists or producers or DJs that I respect are supporting vinyl, I want to return that. And I do that in the form of actually purchasing product. And of course, as you can imagine, it varies a lot depending upon things like age or how long you've been buying. If you're older, or if you've been buying vinyl for 6, 8, 10 years, things like authenticity, originality, things related to sound are probably a little bit more important to you than things like artworking or disc design. You're buying this because this is how you really want to listen to music. Not that one is important without the is less important necessarily than the other. I mean, it's you can't have a product that just has great sound and not so great artwork. You need both. But to older buyers and to buyers who've been doing this for a long time, it's the sonics that really count. On the other hand, if you take a look at somebody who's younger, go back to that 13 to 24 demo, or somebody who's just started buying vinyl in the last year or two, which, as I said, is about a third of the vinyl buyers, they're being influenced a lot by outside marketing stimulus. So, they see ads for vinyl, so they see promotions, they read something about it on social media. An artist that they really like starts talking about a vinyl release, that influences them. They stream it, then they want to buy it. And then after that, it's, hey, the packaging and the artwork and all of that are really cool. So just to, since I kind of opened the door to the fact that there are different segments, we did a lot of segmentation around the buyers of vinyl. And I'm just going to share with you, we probably looked at maybe 8 to 10 different segments. I'm just going to share with you a kind of a contrast of 2 of them. Let me start out by talking about, kind of the veteran committed vinyl buyer, which is about 1 in 4 vinyl buyers. On average, they started buying about 6 years ago or more. They buy at least monthly, and they listen to vinyl at least weekly. And they told us that their vinyl collections on average are about 150 albums. So, they've really got a lot of those cinder blocks piled up in the corner holding all of their records. They skew a little bit more to male, but not as much as we might have thought going into the study. Where people just generally believe that the old veteran buyers were more likely to be men. There are a lot of women who've been at this for a long time as well. They tend to be slightly older than the average. I mean, you don't see as many 13 to 24-year-olds, but you do see some who've been at this for a while, who are 25, 26, 27. They are really buying vinyl to listen to it. For them, it's not so much merch. If they display it, they're also likely to take it down and play it. And in terms of all of the motivators for purchasing, it's about the realism, the authenticity, the originality. But as I said before, those other things are important to them as well, supporting the artists that they like, or looking for packaging features. And what's interesting, and I'll talk about retail in a second, what's interesting is that even though their top places to shop for vinyl are indie record stores and Amazon, don't be surprised if you see that same person shopping at Walmart and Target, or at Barnes and Noble, or at Best Buy. I mean, what's interesting about the most hardcore vinyl buyers is they're totally agnostic as to where they get product. They like indie record stores for obvious reasons that I won't go into. But if they're in Best Buy, they're going to check out what vinyl's there. If they're in Barnes and Noble, they're going to check out what vinyl is there. And they look across the spectrum. We asked about current releases and older albums and re-releases and all of the different versions. They're looking for everything. They're looking for current releases, re-releases, and they're the ones in the back who are, doing that crate digging, looking for older albums. And they're interested in all kinds of editions, right? So it's not only new product, it's limited edition, it's a remaster, it's a bonus version, it's anniversary edition. I remember that, and going back years and years and years ago, I used this term like music hedonist when we were talking about music buyers, probably 15 years ago. These are the same kind of people. I mean, whatever kind of product is out there, they will purchase it. And they really consider themselves to be experts when it comes to music. These are the people that you go to learn about music or hi-fi equipment, or, what's going on in the trends in the industry. Studio quality sound is very important to them. Ownership of music is very important to them. Not just being able to listen, but being able to own. As is the experience of listening to an entire album. I know sometimes we hear in the press, people don't listen to albums anymore. Nothing could be further than the truth when you take a look at this segment of vinyl buyers. And I think what's very encouraging is that 89% are really interested in buying next year. And more than that, more than half of them say that they will probably be buying more next year than they did the year before. So as long as we can keep feeding them product, they'll keep purchasing it. On the other hand, here's a group called New Occasionals. They're about 15% of vinyl buyers. They're some of our new consumers. They started buying within the past 2 years. They just listen a few times per month. Half of them are between the ages of 13 to 24. They will listen to their vinyl collection, but they're more than twice as likely to be the ones who, in a sense, are buying it as merch. You know, they're very into displaying it or collecting it without necessarily listening to it. They do like current releases. They'll buy re-releases of popular albums. You probably won't see them, you know, digging into the deep catalog as the other group would. What appeals to them? Artwork and lyrics. You know, they're not as interested in all of the sonics and sound quality and nostalgia as some of the other segments. 40% of them are buying their new vinyl at Walmart. But I think what's interesting is once they start buying vinyl, you know, they'll also go to Amazon. They'll also go to indie record stores to buy as well. So there's kind of this myth that, you know, some of these buyers are just buying it mass, for example. They actually will start to shop across the spectrum of retailers. I think the thing that's interesting about this group when we start to look, you know, on a forward basis is just to keep in mind that they don't consider themselves to be experts when it comes to music. Music discovery is not that important to them. You know, they're not the first one who's going to run out and find all of these different ways to support artists that they like. And as a result, about 46% are very interested in buying next year, which is a little bit below average. So one of the things that I think is incumbent upon us is, you know, we really need to activate these casual buyers. What are some of the things that could do that for them? They do like limited editions. They do like bonus versions. So kind of keeping a steady pipeline, not only a product, but also a promotion. You know, keeping the noise going with these buyers is going to help sustain that growth in vinyl buyers that we've seen over the past couple of years. So just to talk about, you know, kind of drag segments into sort of what's going on at retail, and we have a huge section on retail, you know, what motivates people to buy, what they're spending, value proposition, and so on. Just for today, I'm just going to hit on kind of two big themes. One thing is this kind of perception that there's one type of vinyl buyer that shops at Target. I think I've seen that lady shopping at Target. And then there's another kind of buyer that shops at indie record stores. Shout out to Looney Tunes, which is a great store in Babylon on Long Island in New York. The reality is when we took a look, I mean, the big takeaway when we took a look at retail is that once buyers start to get into vinyl, and as I mentioned, you know, especially for the veteran buyers, even though they may have a favorite place to go, and that favorite may be a mass merchandiser, it may be an indie record store, it may be Amazon, they tend to shop across different outlets in order to get different kinds of product. Or a lot of what was interesting to me is that a lot of vinyl purchasing is still impulse. I sort of went into this thinking that, you know, I hear about a new vinyl album and it's a destination shop. There's actually more impulse shopping on vinyl than there is on destination shopping. So that's one of the reasons why you see our shoppers, you know, wherever they are, they're taking a look at the vinyl section and maybe picking something up. It's also one of the reasons why, you know, it's especially incumbent upon retail to kind of keep that noise level up. Because if a lot of buyers are just going in and impulse shopping, you know, we want to make sure that we get them into the section and then, you know, give them something or promoting something that they're going to walk out of the cash register with. I did, because we did a lot of analysis of the record store day sample. I just, you know, rather than going into a lot of the other things on retail, I just wanted to make a mention of record store day. One of the things that we really want to know is how many people out there really know anything about Record Store Day. And I was really encouraged that about 60% of our panel sample, that's just the average vinyl buyer, young, old, all of the different segments, about 60% of them were aware. And about a third of them said that they had actually visited or shopped at a participating retailer on Record Store Day. So that, having looked at a ton of categories across my career, and we look at awareness levels for streaming services all of the time, for something to have a 60% awareness level is pretty good across the overall population. So I thought that that was really encouraging. And then if you take a look at the Record Store Day sample, that was great. 85% of them had said that they actually visited or shopped a participating retailer on Record Store Day. So we're getting terrific conversion among the people who have historically been involved in Record Store Day. So what happens if you're aware of Record Store Day? Do good things happen? Yeah, absolutely. 69% of vinyl buyers, this is just your average vinyl buyer, activate pre-Record Store Day. What do I mean by activate? Maybe they do some research. Maybe they sign up for a pre-order. They're actually, once they hear that Record Store Day is coming, they take some action to either purchase or learn more about what's going on. And that's great. I mean, 7 out of 10 doing that before the actual event is terrific. And then about 61% of them activate on Record Store Day. They may actually go into a store, they may buy something. And 49% of vinyl buyers say that they're purchasing a Record Store Day exclusive, and that's 82% for a Record Store Day sample. So when you take a look at the diagnostics around Record Store Day, it's super encouraging in terms of how well it helps to promote the format, the retailers, the artists, I mean, really across all of the stakeholders. And a lot of things are very appealing to all of these buyers, whether it's a discount, or some kind of special deal, whether it's a reissue, whether it's an exclusive. I mean, pretty much everything that the Record Store Day teams have been doing are very attractive to the Record Store Day aware person. I just want to spend a minute, because I alluded before to the relationship between artists and fans when it comes to vinyl. And, certainly, listen, if we can get buyers to purchase anything, whether, the few of them who are still buying CDs or downloads, when we can get them to do some strong engagement on a streaming service, all of this is really terrific for the artists, but, also for their fans. But one thing that we wanted to understand is, how deep does that relationship go among vinyl buyers? So we asked them questions. So let me give you an example. I'll walk you through this. How do you show appreciation for your artists? Right? So I show appreciation by owning or buying their music, or I just show appreciation by streaming and following them on social media. If you take a look at vinyl buyers, and this was on a scale of 1 to 7, so the average score was 5.1, which is great. So 5, you can think about it as, 5 out of 7 say, hey, the best way to support artists is by actually owning and buying music. Same thing, we asked, what's important in terms of supporting artists? Is it just, kind of listening, or is it doing all of these other things, whether you're seeing them live, whether you're activating on social, whether you're, buying their merch or buying vinyl? And again, same score, 5 out of 7. So we were really encouraged that vinyl helps to facilitate that relationship between artists and fans. And as I said earlier, 50% of buyers are citing artist reasons for buying, whether it's, they're releasing music on vinyl, the artists are supporting the format, vinyl has music in the genres that I really like. All of those different things, very important, this relationship between, that vinyl facilitates this relationship between artists and fans. Let me talk about genres for a second. And you know, every time I look at data at what people like to listen because of my age and heritage, I'm always encouraged that, you know, classic rock tends to surface to the top. So when you ask all vinyl buyers, what's your favorite genre to buy or listen to on vinyl? Almost half of them said classic rock, and you can see about a fifth of them said hip hop and indie and adult, and a little bit lower for country. And obviously we looked at all of them. I think we looked at 20 something different genres. So, but what's really interesting about the genre is even if you take a look at ages, so here we've got 13 to 34-year-olds and 35 to 70-year-olds. Take a look at the 13 to 34-year-olds, kind of in the mid blue label. 29% of them said that classic rock is their favorite genre. That's exactly the same number for hip hop and for indie. So, you know, I think it's terrific that this, you know, the younger generation is going back deeper into the catalog, as well as buying new releases and purchasing kind of across the spectrum of all of the different genres. And, you know, we couldn't put all of them on the chart, but I think what's really interesting about the younger buyer is, you know, they are dipping into some of the less popular formats like jazz, like classical, like soundtracks. I mean, you do see them buying really across all of the different genres. But, you know, classic rock still remains one of the most popular genres overall, as well as for younger buyers. So keep that product coming. We also, and we delved a lot into the real specifics of new releases, limited editions, bonus versions, and all of the features around the disc itself. And, you know, that's a lot of detail to present in the webinar. So I just want to give you kind of a high level thing of some of the things that consumers were really interested in. We asked them, you know, what's the impact of different aspects of the recording or the disc design on your likelihood to purchase? And here I'm just picking out a few of the things that we showed. The list was a lot more detailed. What was really interesting is that by far the number one thing that popped in terms of disc design was the quality of the recording itself. You know, something that's high-res audio or perceived as being superior sound quality. 42% said that would make them much more likely to purchase the record. And then we looked at all of the aspects of the packaging, and you could see some of the top things were, you know, unique artwork, having song lyrics in there, having, you know, a poster, a picture, something else visual, which, you know, vinyl is a great carrier for that. So just, you know, one interesting thing that did come up is as we started to, there's diminishing returns with some of these features. So one cautionary message that I would have is, you know, be careful not to overspend or over budget on finding things that we may think are really kind of interesting, but that consumers might not put at the top of their list in terms of motivating them to buy, because there is a diminishing return when you start to get into things that are kind of very, very niche when it comes to features on vinyl. One thing I thought was really interesting, this is actually a quote from Gilles Martin, basically saying that from Variety, what he wants to do is that when, you know, people hear the Beatles, it basically has the same dynamics and other stuff, you know, as other music that they're listening to. So, and he basically said, you know, my kids are listening to Olivia Rodrigo. I want Beatle albums to listen to sound like the same way that Olivia Rodrigo's albums sound like. Folks, I will tell you that consumers massively rejected this concept. What they really do like remasters. They really don't like remixing the music. I mean, if they had a choice of buying a remix of the Beatles that Gilles Martin did versus buying, you know, a mono version of Can't Buy Me Love with a t-shirt, they would overwhelmingly go for that latter decision. So while it's easy to advise some things that consumers do like, I just wanted to point out that there are also some things that kind of tick consumers off as well. So leave those Beatle albums alone. Another kind of interesting thing is we got into all sorts of things about what devices, obviously turntables that they're owning and the cartridges and what all their plans for upgrading their equipment would be over the next year. One of the things that's really interesting about vinyl, the records themselves as well as the equipment, is that this kind of virtuous cycle that goes on. So what happens is I start buying vinyl, or I buy more vinyl, and then I want better audio equipment, right? So I'm investing in my vinyl collection, so I figured I should also invest in my audio equipment. And then what happens is, as I have better audio equipment, I want more vinyl, and then I want even better audio equipment. So what's really wonderful about the format is, they buy the records, they buy the equipment, then they buy more records because the equipment is better. And then they buy even better equipment. So I think it's a really terrific harmony between the hardware and the software. Kind of don't like calling vinyl software, but there is a harmony between the software and the hardware here. So let me just start, kind of summarize this up for you, and before I tell you what I think the future is going to look like. As I mentioned, there is a sizable and sound base of vinyl consumers. They're very diverse. They're very engaged with music, much more than the average music listeners. For those who have purchased or have an affinity for vinyl, it's much more, as I alluded to in a few cases, it's much more than a sound carrier. They think of it as merch. They see their collections as an investment, right? Having a lot of value. They see it as connecting them to the artists. I didn't get into all of the financials and pricing and so on, because in a group where the lawyers don't like us talking about that. But I will tell you that the value proposition for vinyl is very strong. People think at the current pricing levels that value is a terrific deal for what they get. So what does the future bring? And let me just wrap up with that, which was the other question that Mark asked me probably back in January. Are we going to sustain this winning streak? And, what are those implications for the stakeholders, everything from artists to, folks on the line at the pressing plants? And, I want to acknowledge that Luminated had reported that US vinyl sales were up only 1% through mid-year of 22. And, I'm not here today to talk about all of the production and supply issues. I do want to mention that unit sales were up 67% last year. It's really hard to have 2 consecutive years of sales growth like that. What I was really interested in understanding is less about the particulars of the sales growth, but more about the attitude of consumers going forward. So, the question is the party over if sales have leveled off? I don't think so at all. I think, in fact, that the future looks very bright. We asked a lot of questions about future purchase intent. I think we're going to have an overwhelming number of retained buyers. That's people who bought in 21. They'll continue to buy in 22, and they will continue to buy in 23. We asked them, how interested are you in buying vinyl next year? And you can see 92%. If you take 58% very interested, 34% somewhat interested, 92% said that they were interested in buying vinyl in the coming year. So that's a terrific potential conversion number. But it's not only people who are buying vinyl, there's also a lot of interest among people who currently aren't buying any vinyl at all. About 13% said that they were very interested, and about 32% said somewhat interested. So we've got about half of them who haven't bought any vinyl in the past couple of years saying, yeah, if you market to me in one of these ways that I've been talking about, I have some interest in purchasing. And just to, for those of you who are research or math geeks out there, there's about an estimated, as I said, there's 17 million vinyl buyers in the US. There's 226 million non-buyers in the US. If we were to convert 1 in 10 who said that they were very interested, we'd have about 3 million more vinyl buyers. If you took a look at the people who said, yeah, I'm somewhat interested, if we got 1 in 25 of them, we'd have about another 3 million incremental vinyl buyers. So the point being that the pool of people who could potentially be buying vinyl in 2023 and 24 and 25, there's still people that we can tap into. I think one of the real big keys here is going to be how well do we retain the people that we've just brought in over the past couple of years. As I mentioned when we were looking at segmentation, one of the things that's really important for those folks who are new or are casual or occasional is, we've got to kind of keep them on the vinyl train. That's going to be really important to sustaining the health of the format. But I think the commitment's good. When we take a look at active buyers, about 50% of them were in what we call the top 2 boxes in terms of saying, hey, I'm really committed to the format. I see myself continuing to buy vinyl for years to come. And even a lot of the newbies, over half of the newbies said the same thing. So, the diagnostics are really good. It's up to us as an industry just to keep marketing to especially to those casual buyers, keep the flow of product out there so that we can keep them coming into the stores. So just a couple of quick calls to action, then we have a few minutes for questions. Just a couple of takeaways that I have is, I think one thing that we have a tendency to do in the music industry is we always think that, everybody else who's doing something like buying vinyl or is just like ourselves or our kids or our neighbors. This is a very, very fragmented marketplace. When you take a look at vinyl, you've got everything from veterans who've been doing it for 10, 20 years to people who just started buying within the next year. We've got demographic segmentation, young, old, male, female, and we've got a lot of fragmentation based upon what people are interested in, whether that's, limited editions, what the disc looks like, what the sonics are all around. But one thing for sure, as you saw, is across the spectrum, the sound quality, studio quality sound is really, really important to vinyl buyers. As I mentioned, packaging, artwork, personalization, very important. But at some point there are diminishing returns. Important to sustain that artist-fan connection. I mean, it's one of the best things that artists can do for themselves is to have vinyl buyers who are very, very supportive of that relationship. And then, as I was just talking about, continue to activate that casual and non-buyer. That's going to be a key to the format success over the next couple of years. So I just want to thank a couple of more people who helped support the project. Portia and Nicole Hennessy at Music Business Association, the physical committee, especially Steve and Carrie, the folks at the RIAA, particularly Josh and Matt Bass, and Mark, who I mentioned, was the one who got this whole thing started, and Simone Pierce, who was the director of research at Warner, who helped me co-author the study. And I'm happy to take questions if you're interested in learning more. We do have the full report that we're marketing, and we could put some things together if if you're on kind of a budget, we can always put together some kind of a summary together for you. So with that, I'm going to pause and stop sharing my screen, and hopefully there's a few questions out there.
We do have a couple, and I just want to. Yeah,
I'll let you manage the questions.
Sounds like a plan. Before I do, I just want to say thank you, Russ, for all your hard work and help. We were excited to see the numbers come out in early May during Music Biz 2022, and we're grateful to have you back to provide some additional context and info this go around. We do have a couple of questions. Go ahead and run through them and answer them as best we can. If we can't get through any of these folks, we'll make sure to connect you with Russ at the end of this just to get some clarity on what you're looking for. First up here, do you agree with the premise of the RSD book, The Most Improbable Comeback of the 21st Century, that the vinyl resurgence would not have happened in large part without the Record Store Day launch in 2008? And we did kind of touch on Record Store Day a little bit and the legacy of that event during today's talk.
Yeah, I think I would say the answer is yes. I mean, we didn't go back specifically, and ask people questions like that. But I think if you take a look at the diagnostics for Record Store Day, especially among those who have been somewhat active and subscribed to the list, the numbers are really startling. As you all can imagine, I look at a lot of numbers, and when I see the kind of activation and the awareness numbers that I see for Record Store Day, yeah, certain, yes, the answer is yes. I think it's played a huge role, and I'm guessing a lot of those relatively new or virgin buyers wouldn't be here without the efforts of that group all those years ago.
A couple of questions on product variations. First one being, is there evidence that a vinyl release could have too many variations on products? So all those different beautiful color swatches we have that come out month in and month out here.
We didn't ask the question specifically about could there be too much, but as I mentioned, and if whoever's asking the question wants to reach out to me directly, we went into a lot of the detail about the composition, and as I said, I think if I had $1 to spend and it was on really interesting colored discs and all that versus maybe enhancing the artwork or doing some other things, I'd probably put it into the latter. So I'm happy to dig into what some of those features were, but yeah, one of my takeaways is we can get a little too creative, and that's okay. But I just think from a budgeting and a production standpoint, let's just make sure that we're getting folks kind of the 80-20 rule. Let's make sure that we get the 80% in and not worry so much about the 20%.
Another question along those lines has to do with the inclusion of download cards with vinyl purchases. If there's any impact on consumer behavior based on products that include a digital variation. Again, some of this information might be best shared after the fact. I will say, just from a personal anecdote, the first vinyl record I ever bought was with a digital code that gave me access to the album 2 weeks before it launched. I bought it at a show. So for what that's worth.
Yeah, I know that we asked about download cards. To be honest, I'm drawing a blank on how they scored. So again, whoever's asking that question, reach out to me and I'd be happy to take a peek into the data and give you an answer, a direct answer to that.
We have another similar question regarding weight of discs. If there's any impact on consumers for the weight, 180 gram, 120 gram, 140 gram.
Same thing. We have that feature we have that in the data as well, and I'm happy to look at them. So I apologize. There's just so much in this study that probably some of the details are not top of mind, but I'm happy to go back. Or Henrik, if you want to, for questions like that, if we want to compile them, I can send a note out, and then we could send it to everybody who attended today, so that folks can share the answers. But I'm happy to do that.
Yep, that would be fantastic, because we have a couple here too regarding remastered vinyl, old albums that are remastered versus new releases, things like that. One question that we do have that I know you'll be able to give us the answer to. Andrew here is interested at the guitar on your wall. Would love to know what kind it is.
Oh, that's actually it's a Gretsch Junior Jet. I have a couple of others that are in cases on the floor, but it's a great guitar. It's a budget guitar that I bought to just play on the patio, and if I happen to kind of drop it outside or something, it wouldn't be my more expensive Fender or Gibson, but I've come to really love it. And again, reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you where you can get one.
So it looks like the rest of these questions all kind of fall into that very specific product type conversation here. So folks, like what's said here, we will get all that over to Russ and compile some sort of data that kind of addresses what you're looking for and send that around to everybody. As we're approaching the end here, again, I want to say thank you so much to Russ and MusicWatch for your work on this. This is super interesting, super important. And thank you to everyone here for attending today. We're grateful to have you for the first of many fall webinars and the first and definitely not the last conversation we'll have on vinyl records and physical music product in the coming weeks and months. So thank you all again for everything. We're grateful to have you here, and thank you to Russ.
Thank you for the invite, and thanks to everybody in the audience, for spending an hour looking at some data.
Everyone take care. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.